Good morning. Good morning. Today I'm going to take paramyxoviruses. Today I'm going to take paramyxoviruses. It belongs to the myxoviruses. Besides with orthomyxovirus, this is another virus which causes mainly the respiratory tract infection. It belongs to the family Paramyxoviridae. Again, it divided into four genera. I mean, four genera. Three genera. They are parainfluenza, morbillivirus. Next, rubella virus, which contains mumps virus. Another genera is also there, which causes the RSV infection. It belongs to the genus Pneumovirus. If you see the difference between the orthomyxovirus and paramyxovirus, these are some of the differentiating points of the ortho and paramyxo. Size, we see the size of this orthomyxo a little bit smaller when compared to the paramyxovirus. Shape is spherical or filamentous in pressure isolates, whereas the paramyxovirus almost exhibits pleomorphism. Genome of orthomyxo contains RNA is divided into 8 segments, whereas in paramyxovirus single linear RNA molecule is there. You see the diameter of the nucleocapsid is it is a little bit smaller when compared to the paramyxovirus, that is 8 nanometers in case of paramyxovirus. Site of synthesis of this ribonucleoprotein for orthomyxovirus is nucleus, whereas paramyxovirus is cytoplasm. Genetic reassortment is most commonly seen in orthomyxovirus, whereas doesn't exhibit any antigenic variability and also genetic assortment. Hemolysin activity is absent in orthomyxovirus, whereas it is present in paramyxovirus. For replication, it requires a RNA-dependent RNA polymerase in case of orthomyxovirus, but in case of doesn't require in paramyxovirus. We see the shape of the paramyxovirus. It contains a single linear RNA virus enclosed in a nucleic capsid. Again, it is covered by an envelope which has M protein. This again it contains some spikes. They are nothing but a long spike is glycoprotein, which have a H protein or G protein. It has activity of neuraminidase. It has also the activity of neuraminidase. This H activity is mainly responsible for hemagglutination. Not only that, it also exhibits the neuraminidase activity. And another spike is small when compared to the H spike. It is nothing but a F glycoprotein. Next, it contains RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. This is about the structure of the paramyxovirus. So this H spike contains both the activity of hemolytic and hemagglutination activity and neuraminidase activity. It is mainly responsible for the absorption of the virus to the host cell, whereas F protein is responsible for the fusion of the virions to the plasma membrane of the host cells. In that way, it enters into the host cell. If we say the mumps etiology, it mainly affects the parotid gland. Not only that, sometimes it also affects the submandibular gland or sublingual glands. Mainly it affects the salivary gland. and the human beings, it mainly infects the children who are not immunized, and most severe complications are seen in if it affects the adults. It mainly transmits through the droplets or vomits or direct contact. Incubation period is almost 14 to 25 days. 25 days. And if you see the mumps virus, it belongs to the rubella virus. It belongs to the genera rubella virus. It's an RNA virus. Exhibits only single antigenic type. Doesn't show any antigenic variability. It is rapidly inactivated by the either formaldehyde or ultraviolet rays. And if you see the structure, it's almost similar to that of the orthomyxovirus, but a little bit larger when compared to the orthomyxovirus. It almost ranges about the size ranges about 100 to 300 nanometers in size. It exhibits the giant and filamentous forms, contains single stranded RNA. Do not contain segmented RNA, whereas in case of orthomyxovirus, we'll see the 8 segmented RNA, 8 segments of the RNA. Doesn't show any antigenic variability, where we'll see that in case of orthomyxoviruses. These genetic reassignments are absent in this case of paramyxovirus. If you see the pathogenesis of this mumps virus, whenever the human gets the infection through the through the inhalation of the aerosols or contact or vomits, in humans, first there is a local multiplication. Later it enters into the blood. It's nothing but a viremia. After that, it reaches the reticular endothelial cells, where heavy multiplication takes place. After that, it reaches the distant organs like parotid glands, parotid gland or testis, ovaries, peripheral nerves, eyes, inner ear, central nervous system, and sometimes it also affects the pancreas. It's nothing but a secondary viremia. Okay, it multiplies in the ductal epithelial cells of the parotid gland. It mainly affects the parotid gland, and we'll see non-separative swelling of the parotid. Usually it resolves after 1 week. Swelling will resolve after 1 week. And after an incubation period of 14 to 25 days, we'll see the onset of the symptoms like swelling of the parotid gland. It may be unilateral. Sometimes it may be, in severe cases, we can see a bilateral thing also. Sometimes it also affects the testis also, architis. Sometimes it also affects the epididymitis, epididymis. So it is nothing but epididyma architis. It leads to, in some cases, usually recovery is common, but sometimes it leads to sterility of the person. Sometimes it also affects, sometimes we also see mastitis, pancreatitis, thyroiditis, and in severe cases we'll see encephalitis. Okay, meningoencephalitis if it infects the brain. Usually there is a recovery. In some cases, 10% of them show the headache, fever, stiff neck. These are some of the severe complications if it affects the central nervous system. This is a picture showing the mumps case where there is an involvement of the submandibular gland. So here you are seeing that swelling of the submandibular gland of submandibular gland of a child. And here this picture shows the parotid gland involvement, non-separative swelling of the parotid gland. What are the symptoms of this mumps? Usually you see fever, loss of appetite, headache, muscle pain, pain when eating, pain in the ears, jaw, chin, swollen cheeks. These are some of the symptoms of the mumps. Okay. Usually it spreads by airborne, already told, direct contact, saliva, or touching of the contaminated surfaces. This is another picture showing the another picture which affects an adult, showing swelling of the parotid. We see the complications of this mumps. First one is orchitis. Sometimes we will also see epididymo-orchitis. Other complications are pancreatitis, meningitis, thyroiditis, neuritis, hepatitis, ovaritis, and spontaneous abortions. In case of if it affects the pregnant lady, we'll see sometimes a spontaneous abortion also. Rarely we'll see hearing loss, polyarthritis, encephalitis, and cerebellar ataxia. And if you see the laboratory diagnosis, the samples that we collect for the diagnosis of the mumps are saliva, urine, CSF, nasal swab, mainly saliva, urine, CSF, sometimes nasal secretions also. The clinical symptoms itself is evident. No laboratory diagnosis is essential in which states. So clinical picture shows that the person is suffering from the mumps. In some cases, atypical if it affects atypical, if you see any atypical clinical manifestations like if it involves the CNS, in that case we will take the definitive diagnosis can be obtained by using the samples. Okay, what are the things that you will use for in case of laboratory diagnosis? First one is direct microscopy. Next one is viral isolation by using the embryonated egg or by using the cell culture lines. Embryonated egg, in embryonated egg, 6 to 8 days egg is necessary for isolation of this mumps virus. In cell lines that we use are human amnion or HeLa cells, or monkey kidney cells are also used. ELISA tests that we commonly used are ELISA complement fixation tests. In case of isolation of mumps virus, the route that we commonly use is amniotic route. Amniotic route. That to be we have to take 6 to 8 days of embryonated egg. With the help of rapid diagnosis can be obtained by using the immunofluorescence microscopy. Next. Molecular methods like PCR is also available for the diagnosis of the mumps. If you see the serological, if you use this serological tests because of wide range of cross reactions, that is one of the major disadvantages of the serological test. But using IgM antibody ELISA is helpful for the specific diagnosis of the MIMS. Other thing is paid serum sample is also used, where we'll see if there is any possibility, we'll see rise and titer of the antibody level between acute and convalescent specimens. Previously live attenuated vaccines, so many attenuated vaccines are used, but due to allergic reactions, they are not commonly used now. But nowadays we are using the Geril-Lin strain. These are attenuated by serial passages in the chick embryo and isolated, grown in the chick embryo, attenuated by serial passages in the chick embryo fibroblasts. It is also grown in the embryonic fibroblasts. It may be given as a single. Sometimes it can be given as a triple vaccine, that is MMR vaccine, that will be a subcutaneous dose. Immunity lasts for 10 years. This is about the mumps. And if is, next one is a parainfluenza virus. Next one is parainfluenza virus. It is also single stranded RNA virus. Enveloped virus with hemagglutinin contains hemagglutinin and neuraminidase spikes and fusion protein. Hemagglutinin neuraminidase spike is mainly used for absorption onto the host cell, whereas fusion F protein spike is mainly used for fusion of the virus into the host cell. These are of 4 types. The parainfluenza viruses are of 4 types. They are parainfluenza 1, type 1, type 2, type 3, and 4A, 4B. This is an electron microscopic picture showing parainfluenza virus filamentous structures. And type 1 and type 2, usually this parainfluenza virus mainly causes the upper respiratory tract infection, mainly it affects the children. Mainly it affects the children. Previously, type 1, Sendai virus and hemagglutinin, a similar virus, and hemagglutinin 2 virus is grouped and called it as type 1 virus. So, Sendai virus and hemagglutinin 2 viruses. These 2 viruses are grouped and named it as type 1 virus. This type 1 virus mainly causes, usually it causes inapparent infection. Sometimes in severe cases you will see the tracheobronchitis also. Type 2 usually causes the croup. That's it. Causes the croup is nothing but acute laryngotracheobronchitis in children. In children. Here in this case, there is edema, there is desquamation of the alveolar ducts and alveoli. There is necrosis also seen, which leads to edema. Sometimes it may causes the pneumonia also. Type 3 causes the tracheobronchitis, bronchiolitis, and pneumonia in children below 5 years of age. Next, type 4 usually causes this type 4 doesn't cause that much of severity. It causes only a mild respiratory tract infection. If you see the laboratory diagnosis, as usual. Nasal secretions or nasal swabs or oral throat swabs are the best samples for the diagnosis of the parainfluenza virus. Serological diagnosis can be serological diagnosis test that can be obtained by using the paid sera, where you will see if the person has a parainfluenza virus, there is a fourfold rise of the titer of the antibodies between acute and convalescent sera, which we can take it as a confirmatory diagnosis. So this is a picture showing a baby suffering with laryngotracheobronchitis. Here, because of this infection, there is an obstruction. Why we'll see this obstruction? Because of this necrosis or swelling of the alveolar ducts or alveoli results in the edema, causing the obstruction. It's nothing but a croup. Severe inflammation and obstruction of the upper airway. Usually it causes the laryngotracheobronchitis. Involves the larynx, trachea, and bronchial passageways. In those cases, the other manifestations are hoarseness of voice, inspirator, stridor, barking cough. Often worse at night, low-grade fever can be seen. Sometimes respiratory distress, or orthopnea is also other manifestations. Specimens that we commonly take are nasal swabs or throat swabs. The detection, first one is detection detection of the antigen can be obtained by using the immunofluorescence microscope, and also by using the molecular methods like PCR. Virus can be isolated by using the chick embryo, using the root is amniotic root, and cells that become amniotic root. After 10 days, we'll get the growth on the amniotic fluid. This growth can be identified by using the heme inhibition test. Okay, heme inhibition or heme absorption test. The cell lines that we commonly used are HeLa cells, or monkey kidney cell lines, or human amniotic cells are also used for virus isolation. Neutralization tests or complementation tests are also used for detection of the antibodies. ELISA is also used for detection of the rising titer of the antibodies. This is about the para-influenza viruses. Usually it causes the upper respiratory tract infection. Yeah, that could be in infants in case of type 1 and type 2, and in type 3 usually it affects the children. Next one is Newcastle disease. This also comes under a paramyxoviruses. This Newcastle disease is mainly affects the birds. It's a very fatal viral disease to the birds. That could be poultry. In humans, the clinical manifestation that we'll see are conjunctivitis, who are handling the chicks. Okay, usually this Newcastle disease is seen as an endemic in Asia, Middle East Asia, and Africa. It also occurs in Europe and Australia and North America. The next one is RSV. It comes under the genera pneumovirus. This respiratory syncytial virus. Another important thing I forgot to tell you is it is because of the presence of the F fusion protein. One protein that I told, fusion protein. Usually it causes the fusion of the virus into the host cell. Because not only it fuses into the host cell, it also causes the fusion of the adjacent cells of the adjacent host cells. So because of that, we'll see multinucleated giant cells. This is another important characteristic feature of the paramyxoviruses. Here in this case, this respiratory syncytial virus is highly contagious. It is an enveloped, non-segmented, negative-stranded RNA virus. It contains two proteins, that is G protein spike, that is responsible for the attachment of the virus to the host cell, and F protein spike, that is responsible for the fusion of the virus to the host cell, thereby causing the syncytial or multinucleated giant cells. Okay, here it is divided up neuraminidase and hemolytic activity. This is another important characteristic feature of the respiratory syncytial virus. And nucleic capsid a little bit smaller when compared to the other mumps virus and parainfluenza virus. It measures about 13 nanometers. This another important characteristic feature is this RSV mainly infects the lower respiratory tract infection. That could be 1 year of age. 1 year of age. So next, if you see the epidemiology of this respiratory syncytial virus, is globally distributed. Outbreaks are common in children's nurseries and daycare centers, usually transmitted by close contact, or through fomites. through formats or through aerosols or droplets. And here the secretary IgA is protective when compared to the IgG, when compared to the circulating IgG, because this IgG usually seen in the blood, whereas secretary IgA is seen in the respiratory tract epithelial cells. And not only in that, intestinal lumen is also in intestinal lumen also secretary IgA is present. But here in this case, it usually involves the upper lower respiratory tract. Here secretary IgA is mainly involves for the defense mechanism. And not only that, CMI, cell-mediated immunity, is more important than humoral-mediated immunity. Okay, this is a structure showing the respiratory syncytial virus. Here, it contains two proteins, that is G protein and F protein. Whereas in mumps and parainfluenza virus, we'll see this hemagglutinin spike containing neuraminidase activities also. Okay, neuraminidase activity is also present along with the hemolytic activity and hemagglutinin activity. Fusion protein is also there. Here it contains two activities. It is divided of neuraminidase activity and hemolytic activity. This G protein is responsible for the absorption to the surface of the host cell, whereas F protein is responsible for the fusion of the viral protein into the host cell. It contains a single-stranded RNA. This nucleocapsid is covered by lipid envelope, which contains spikes. If you see the pathogenesis, it is usually restricted to the respiratory tract. Human gets the infection through aerosols or direct contact. Through direct contact. After local multiplication, it enters into the bloodstream. Local multiplication in the lymph nodes, it enters into the bloodstream. It is nothing but a primary viremia. From the blood, it reaches from there it reaches into the reticuloendothelial cells. After local multiplication, it spreads locally from cell to cell, thereby causing the syncytium or multinucleated giant cells. It doesn't cause any systemic involvement. It causes only local transmission, local spread, cell to cell spread. This virus doesn't cause any viremia or systemic spread. Results leads to bronchiolitis or pneumonia. Usually it affects the lumens of the bronchi, alveolar ducts, or alveoli, results in the plugging of the lumen with exudates and edema, leading to obstruction of the normal airway. And incubation period of this RSV is 4 to 5 days. That is very short incubation period. Usually it encounters the 6 weeks to 9 months of babies. Affects the lower respiratory tract. The symptoms that we will see is cough, coryza, wheeze, low-grade fever. However, in advancing age, the RSV infection is confined more to the lower respiratory tract. Secondary bacterial complications are there. It also affects because as it affects the respiratory tract, it may lead to ear infections also. So we'll see otitis media, viral otitis media also. In severe cases, it leads to chronic respiratory disease and may develop chronic respiratory disease and particularly with asthma. And if you see the laboratory diagnosis of this RSV, can be RSV antigen can be detected by using the immunofluorescent microscopes or by uh, rapid diagnostic tests, viral antigen by rapid diagnostic tests by using the immunofluorescent testing, and viral isolation by using the HeLa cells, monkey kidney cells, human amnion cells. These are some of the cell lines can be used for the isolation, viral isolation of this RSV. Uh, but it takes a little bit more time. That means after inoculation of this nasal secretions on the cell lines, it takes for its growth. It takes about 10 days. If you see the growth of this virus, growth can be observed as sensational multinucleated chain cells of the cell lines. It indicates the person is infected with RSV. Okay. Rapid antigen detection. Antigens can be detected by using the immunofluorescence or ELISA, using the specific monoclonal antibodies. HeLa cells, F2 cells are also used. Cell lines are also used, already told. Syncytial formation is the one of the important characteristic feature for the growth of the RSV. Serological diagnosis can be obtained by using the ELISA, for the demonstration of the antibodies. By using paired sera is also used for diagnosis of this RSV. Molecular diagnostic tests like PCR is available for the diagnosis of the RSV. No vaccine is available for this RSV. Supported symptomatic care symptomatic care is essential for the treatment of the RSV cases. The drugs that commonly used antiviral drug is ribavirin, which can be used as an aerosol. Particularly, parental administration of the gamma globulins is also used for the treatment of the high risk cases. And next most important topic, that is measles. This is also called rubiola. That mumps belongs to the genus Rubula, whereas the other name for measles here is rubiola. Okay. This, if you see the history of this measles, measles was first described by Thomas Sydenham during the period of 1619. In earlier days, in previous olden days, when people they are unable to distinguish between the smallpox and measles. At the time, they thought that if this measles, they thought that it may be a smallpox. Okay, but later this Thomas Sydenham had described about this measles during the period of 1690. Later, the full description and scientific knowledge about this measles is given by Peter Sydenham, a Danish medical student, by observing and conducted a study and epidemic in the four islands during the period of 1846. And Goldberger and Anderson they also conducted some studies on measles, and Anderson Peebles grown this measles virus in chick embryonated egg during the period of 1954. If you see the structure of this measles virus, as usual, it contains M protein and fusion protein, single stranded RNA enclosed in a capsid, enclosed by a lipoprotein envelope. It contains hemagglutinin spike. It contains hemagglutinin spike and fusion protein. and measures about 122 to 250 nanometers in size. It is roughly spherical. Next, the type it contains, if you see the morphology, it contains a tightly coiled helical nucleocapsid is surrounded by a lipoprotein envelope carrying at its surface hemoglobin spikes and also fusion spikes. Incubation period is at about 10 days. Uh, what are the factors that are responsible for transmission? For transmission of this measles is secretions of the nose, throat, and respiratory tract secretions, aerosols, direct contact, contaminated surfaces, formats. These are all the factors that are responsible for the transmission of the measles. Virus remains active and contagious in the air also for about 2 hours. Period of communicability is 4 days before and 4 days after the appearance of the rash. The person is highly infectious during the period of prodromal period, first 2 days, and the time of eruption. And if you see the host factors, commonly affects the 6 months to 3 years, not below the 6 months, because maternal antibodies will protect the infant, will protect the child, 6 months baby child. 6 months to 6 months to 3 years are the important age factor for the important age where we'll see high infectivity. More than 5 years in developed countries. Incidence of this incidence is equal in both sexes. No age is immune if there is no previous immunity. Okay. But high infectivity rate is commonly seen between the age of 6 months to 3 years. One attack will remain will cause lifelong immunity. It usually affects some malnourished children. Mortality rate is high in that case. Environmental factors like tropical, this measles is commonly seen during the period of late winter and early spring. High incidence is commonly seen during the period of April. Okay. Overcrowding is also one of the important factor for the infection of the measles. If you see the pathogenesis of this measles, usually it is transmitted by direct contact through aerosols or formats. After local entry, it multiplies in the lymph nodes. In the lymph nodes, then it reach. After that, there is an viremia. After that, there is an viremia. Viremia, that means virus can be disseminated into the reticular endothelial cells. In the reticular after hematoplication of reticular endothelial cells, it released into these viral particles are released into the blood. This is nothing but the secondary viremia and reaches the distant organs. Okay. At the time only we'll see the clinical manifestations like prodromal illness. Prodromal illness like fever, malaise, headache, backaches. These are some of the things can be seen. This usually associated with distant organs like skin, secondary viremia in distant organs like skin, mouth. These are the important respiratory tract. These are the important organs that will reach for the manifestations. After secondary viremia, we'll see there is epithelial necrosis, skin epithelial necrosis, along with giant cell formation and virus shedding. With onset of rash, there is a antibody production begins and viral replication symptoms begin to subside. So, IgM antibody is here. This IgM antibody will be seen during the during the period of after 2 days the appearance of the at the time of appearance of the rash only we'll see the IgM antibodies. IgG antibodies are usually seen after the 1 month of the after 1 month. Rash is the leading manifestation. Here in this case in measles, maculopapular rashes are the most important manifestations. Usually spreads from head to down. These rashes are usually first seen near the forehead, and then it spreads to downwards. In the same way, desquamation is also subsiding of these rashes are also seen in the same way in that order only. Rashes will desquamate. Rashes may last for 4 to 6 days. Okay, complete recovery from illness generally occurs within 7 to 10 days from the onset of the rash. From the onset of the rash. Necrosis of the respiratory tract epithelium and accompanying lymphatic infiltration. Sometimes we'll see that there is a small vessel vasculitis on the skin and on the oral mucous membrane also. Another important pathognomic feature of this measles is there is a formation of the syncytium. Syncytial formation in the lymphoid organs. This class lo unnamma oka initial Warthin-Finkelday giant cells. This is another important. This is one of the important characteristic feature of the measles. Okay, usually seen in the lymphoid organs, where you will see intracytoplasmic and intranuclear inclusions. Almost 100 nuclei can be seen in a multinucleated giant cell. It also infects the CD4 T cells. They are nothing but the helper cells, resulting in the suppression of the Th1 immune response. Temperature rises about high temperature. You will see measles rash, generalized maculopapular erythematous rashes are usually seen. They are confluent. Usually begins on the face, that to be in the forehead. Next, it spreads downwards. Like neck, trunk, arms, legs, okay, and feet in the next 24 to 48 hours. So symptoms that we will see are measles is contagious, and if an infected child coughs or sneezes, spread in the air and infect the person close to the child. Some of the symptoms are fever, non-protective cough, runny nose, sore throat, conjunctivitis, and red skin rashes. Another important pathognomic feature of this measles is Koplik spots. Appearance of the Koplik spots that in the buccal mucosa, that to be to the lower opposite to the lower molar tooth. They appear as bluish white ulcerated lesions. Okay, bluish white ulcerated lesions in the buccal mucosa. Not only in that, it also Koplik spots also can also occur in the intestines or in the respiratory tract also. But by seeing these Koplik spots, we will say the person that the person had infected with measles virus. Okay, this is the picture showing the Koplik spots, white pinhead-sized ulcers. Koplik spots, bluish white. Here we are unable to see the bluish, but white. Usually say bluish white ulcerated lesions opposite to the lower molars. They are nothing but grains of salt appearance. This is the picture showing the child have maculopapular erythematous rashes. This is another picture. These are some of the complications of the measles. The final complication of this measles is it's a rare case. If it's a rare case, it infects the sometimes it enters the central nervous system also. Rarely we'll see the subacute sclerosic parencephalitis also. We see the laboratory diagnosis of this measles. The clinical manifestations itself is evident. Evident that the person is suffering with the measles. But if there is any atypical features, in that case, laboratory diagnosis of the measles is necessary. Detection of the antigen can be obtained by immunofluorescence or by ELISA using a specific monoclonal antibodies. Virus isolation can be done by using the Taylor cells, Schefter cells, or monkey kidney cells, primary monkey kidney cells, or human amnion cells, where in the case chain multinucleated cells formation can be seen. This is the picture showing the giant cell, multinucleated giant cell. Other tests that are available are hemagglutination inhibition, immunofluorescence, utilization tests. By using serological tests, paired serum sample is the most specific and sensitive. There is any rise in titer of the antibodies indicating the person titer in the antibodies, the person have the measles infection. Treatment of the measles is no specific antiviral treatment is there. Supportive care is essential. Antibiotic is essential for treatment of the eye or ear infection. To prevent the eye damage for children, a vitamin A supplementation can be given 24 hours apart in 2 doses. Eradication can be achieved by immunization rate of at least 96% under the age of under 1 year of age. Live attenuated subcutaneous vaccine that to be 9 to 12 months of age can be given. It can be given as a single vaccine or can be given as a triple vaccine. In this case, immunoglobulin is also available. Passive protection by means of human gamma globulins in high-risk cases like pregnant ladies or immunodeficient patients like that. For active immunization, live vaccine previously Adam Stone strain is used, but because of allergic reactions, it is not used nowadays. Swatch and Mobritain strain is also used, but it is not effective. It is effective more than 15 months older people. But here another vaccine is there. It's developed after Swatch and Mobritain strain vaccine. Adam Stone Jagrib strain is effective even in infants 4 to 6 months of age. Next one is nymphovirus. Here this nymphovirus is a zoonotic disease originated from the fruit bats. Human gets the infection by direct contact of this fruit bats or person in direct contact with fruit bats or infected patients or contact with the pigs also. The person may get the infection of respiratory tract infection. This was first discovered in Malaysia. Symptoms are respiratory tract infection, fever, headache, drowsiness, disorientation. CNS manifestations are also there. Encephalitis are another important manifestation. Incubation period is almost 5 to 14 days. No specific treatment is there for Nipah virus. Primary treatment is intensive supportive care. This is some of the do's and don'ts of the do's and don'ts for the control of the Nipah virus infection. That is that prevent the contact with bat excreta. Maintain a distance of at least 1 meter. Minimum maintaining distance between persons is 1 meter. Using personal hygiene. And if there is any suspected person, do contact with the nearest healthcare facility. Avoid traveling to the affected area. These are the do's. Don'ts are do not have close contact with patients with confirmed Nipah virus, including sharing utensils, cloths, and bed. Do not have close contact with patients and sharing beds with the patients. and also do not have close contact with patients who died of Nipah virus infection, and go for self-medication. This completes the paramyxoviruses. Thank you.